Roboute Guilliman did not land on a world that tried to kill him. Most Primarchs did. The 13th son landed on Macragge, a cold world in the galactic east, but one whose people had held onto a functioning society through the Age of Strife. So when local hunters found a capsule in the wilderness carrying a child, they brought it to the consul governing the most powerful region on the planet. The leader was Konor Guilliman. He adopted the boy without hesitation. As described in the book The Unremembered Empire, the elder statesman governed through reform, stripping power from the old ruling class, rebuilding roads and public services, and pushing rights for workers. These changes made him beloved by the common people, but created dangerous enemies among the wealthy elite. He taught Roboute that a capacity for theory was admirable, but a stomach for the practical was priceless. No plan should ever be trusted without question, and a leader must always have a backup he can live with. Those lessons became the foundation of his son's entire life. There was another figure who shaped the boy just as much. Tarasha Euten, Konor's advisor, became the closest thing he ever had to a mother. His father sharpened his skills of leadership, she developed his empathy. Together, they gave him what almost no other Primarch received, a balanced childhood. By the age of 12, the young Roboute was already commanding a military campaign in Imperium, a lawless region of warring tribes. He won his battles and won the respect of the fighters he defeated, proving early on that talking was just as valid a weapon as fighting. However, while the young general was away, disaster struck at home. The second ruler of the planet conspired with the wealthy elite to overthrow the government. His forces attacked the Senate. A drunken mob tore through the capital. So when Roboute returned, he saw smoke rising from the city and learned his father was trapped inside the ruined Senate building. He fought his way to the heart of the city alone, but he arrived too late. He found his father dying beneath the rubble. 3 days the wounded consul had held the defense. With his last words, he named every person involved in the plot. That single moment shaped everything he built for the rest of his life, because instead of taking personal revenge, he handed the traitor's fate to the Senate. The plotters were publicly executed. Their followers were sentenced to hard labor, forced to rebuild the city stone by stone. He did not just want revenge, he wanted a system that would outlast him. Under his sole rule, Macragge was remade from the ground up, and using the planet's existing ships, he began reaching out to neighboring systems. So by the time the Emperor arrived, the young ruler had already laid the groundwork for the realm of Ultramar. He took command of the 13th Legion, renaming them the Ultramarines, and turned them into the largest force in the Imperium, numbering over 250,000 warriors. For over a century, he built the most stable empire in human history, connecting 500 worlds and preparing his warriors for a galaxy where the fighting would one day stop. But everything he built was about to be torn apart by a brother he had helped humiliate. A surprise attack nearly wiped out half of his legion. The betrayal cut his empire off from the galaxy, forcing him into a desperate choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Years later, a poison blade from another fallen brother put him into frozen stasis for 10,000 years. His name became a prayer. His body became a shrine. The Imperium he had built became the opposite of what he fought for, a religious empire driven by fear, superstition, and decay. When he finally woke, he found a civilization that worshipped his father as a god, burned anyone who thought differently, and had forgotten every principle he had given his life to protect. What the Imperium's greatest architect did next, and what it cost him, would reshape the galaxy itself. Chapter 1. The Perfect Son. The Lord of Mankind was impressed. Unlike his meetings with more savage sons, the Emperor greeted his 13th son without reservation. The young ruler already understood the truth of his origins, having figured out on his own that he had been created for a greater purpose. He swore his loyalty immediately, took command of the 13th Legion of Space Marines, and began tearing it apart from the ground up. But to understand what made the 13th son different from his brothers, the details of his early life on Macragge matter. As described in the book The Unremembered Empire, his adopted father governed from a teak desk using an ancient cogitator from the golden age of technology to monitor news flows and data traffic across his domain. His dream was to rebuild the mythical 500 worlds of Ultramar. The boy he named Roboute, a name that meant Great One, grew at a rate that alarmed his tutors, mastering every subject they could offer by the age of 10. History, philosophy, science. His memory allowed him to recall every lesson with perfect clarity. Tarasha Euten, Konor's closest advisor and personal secretary, became more than a caretaker. So great was her understanding of politics that even the chapter masters of the Heresy-era Ultramarines respected her for her abilities alone. Throughout his life, when faced with difficult decisions, the Lord of the 13th would think on her advice, and the fact that a son of the Emperor was willing to bow to the counsel of a mortal woman spoke to just how sharp she truly was. His father established the standards by which he would lead, while she stood by his side encouraging, advising, and enabling him to reach those standards. During the coup that killed his father, the co-ruler Guilliman conspired with the wealthiest members of the ruling class. His son watched Konor die in his arms and held himself responsible for not being there to save him. The grief was real, but instead of taking personal violence as his answer, he built something that would outlast any single ruler. As described in the novel Pharaohs, he held Ultramar not as a personal kingdom, but in trust for humanity, a distinction that mattered to him more than any title. Merit replaced birthright. Technology was open to all citizens. The armed forces were rebuilt into a professional military, and his civil codes wrapped around even the poorest quarters of the capital, bringing order to every level of society. That system would one day govern 500 worlds, but the man who built it would never forget the price of the lesson that started it all. He viewed a military force not just as its warriors, but as the full chain keeping them fighting. Supply lines, starships, factories, and the worlds providing new recruits. He reshaped the Legion's organization and methods, drawing on the home world's military traditions and a thorough study of every other Imperial force. The result was a formation that was both precise and fair, where individual bravery was rewarded, but obedience to the chain of command was absolute. He gave them new colors of deep blue trimmed with gold and adopted the ancient Ultima symbol as their mark. What he built next would become the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and it would not be enough to save the people he loved. During the Great Crusade that followed, the Ultramarines became one of the most effective forces in the entire Imperium. As detailed in the book Know No Fear, the builder of Ultramar trained his officers to be rulers as well as leaders, believing that Space Marines were designed to excel at governance, not just war. He saw the Crusade as a temporary phase, a building raised by a builder who knew he would not worship in it. Once the fighting was done, his warriors were meant to have a second purpose: governing, building, and leading humanity into an age of peace. His approach to bringing new worlds in was different from nearly every other Primarch. While brothers like Angron simply burned what stood in their path, and others like Leman Russ built a reputation for savagery that did not exactly paint the Imperium in the best light, the Lord of the 13 made his first contact a greeting rather than a gunshot. In every world he took, he established a stable government, working public services, self-sustaining defenses, and connections to a wider economic network. Veterans were encouraged to claim shares of land earned through service on rising worlds, tying military service directly to civilian settlement and farming. He also raised standing armies on those worlds so order would not collapse the moment the Legion left the system. Meanwhile, the Legion's numbers grew at a pace that startled even the Emperor's court. His organizational ability, combined with the toughness of the gene seed and its rapid reproduction rate, led to an explosion in size. Part of this growth may have come from an uncomfortable source. The 13th son almost certainly absorbed warriors from the lost 2nd and 11th Legions into his own numbers. He was also one of the Primarchs, alongside Rogal Dorn, who came up with the idea that the memory of those two lost legions should be removed from the minds of the remaining brothers, showing that for all his beliefs and openness, the master of the 500 worlds was not above hidden dealing when he felt it was necessary. For all his brilliance, the Lord of Ultramar was not without flaws. He could be proud, convinced that his way was the best way unless someone proved otherwise. He clashed with Alpharius over the Alpha Legion's love of tricks and hidden operations, viewing such methods as dishonorable. It took Corvus Corax, the Lord of the Raven Guard, to teach him that stealth tactics and smaller units could still win the day, a lesson his Roman-style mindset of ranked formations struggled to accept. Once someone beat him though, he never let it happen the same way twice. After the first few wargames, he adapted so thoroughly that Corax could never beat him again, admitting that while he might win a battle, he can never win the war. However, one early battle showed his combat ability in ways that went beyond planning. Years before the Heresy, a dangerous alien race called the Cybrids had defeated the Ultramarines during the Osiris Cluster Rebellion, leaving a stain on the Legion's honor that haunted them for decades. When the Cybrids finally resurfaced, the Lord of the 13 had been running battle plans against them in his mind for years. He drove his fleet and nearly 100,000 warriors directly into the heart of the enemy, ordered full-scale boarding assaults on the Cybrid ships, and personally broke into the inner chamber of the largest enemy vessel. There, he faced the Cybrid King, a towering, multi-limbed creature giving off waves of psychic energy. His chief battle psyker, Aerith Toy, gave his life to shield him from the alien's mental attacks. It was not enough to save the psyker, but it was enough. The 13th Son fought the creature hand-to-hand, cutting it apart limb by limb and crushing its glowing brain beneath his heel. The Master of the 500 Worlds also carried a black mark from the Great Crusade that would haunt him for thousands of years. When the Emperor decided to punish Lorgar of the Worldbearers for spreading worship of the Master of Mankind as a god, he chose his legion to help burn the preacher's holy city of Monarchia to the ground. The Lord of the 13 did not hesitate to carry out the order, but privately he felt deep discomfort over it. Thousands of years later, he would admit that while the Lord of the 17th had certainly fallen to his delusions much earlier, it was the anger of the Ultramarine troops on the last day of Monarchia that had pushed his humiliated brother's legion into the hands of chaos. He blamed himself for starting the war that returned the galaxy to darkness, and the brother he had helped humiliate was already planning to make him pay for it. Chapter 2: Empire Ascendant. A city bus on the frontier world of Sotha ran on schedule to the second, keeping its timetable regardless of how many passengers it carried. That single detail, described in the book Pharaohs, captured the nature of the civilization the Lord of the 500 Worlds had built. Nothing existed without purpose in his domain. Every road and every field was planned on maps before a single stone was laid. The great sewer systems of Calth were built long before the people living there even needed them. Common soldiers looked at their lord and saw a master who left nothing to chance, a ruler who treated every citizen as part of a calculation designed to reach the best possible outcome for society as a whole. On the frontier, he established mortal defense forces like the Solar First Irregular Auxilia, bringing common people into the defense of their own planets and then honoring them by ordering his Space Marines to bear the symbol of crossed scythes on their armor to mark the bond between the Legion and the people of Sotha. On Macragge, he had made sure that his capital's ports served trade and business, not just war. On Calth, he built the Holofusikon, a museum of the future meant to serve as a storehouse for all of mankind's learning. Every world served a purpose, and every purpose served the people living inside it. Even during periods of extreme stress, when grief or rage filled his thoughts, his brain continued what was described as automatic tinkering, adjusting displays of system defenses, reordering fleet positions, and moving outer weapons platforms and minefields with simple touches of his fingers. He was said to know every one of his sons by name and sight. He proved it by immediately recognizing individual sergeants among thousands of warriors. He processed every situation through the same rigid system of theoreticals and practicals that defined his rule. Theoreticals were the plans and possible outcomes, while practicals were the actions taken to make those ideals real. This way of thinking became the core method of the entire Legion and spread to the governance of Ultramar itself. He also understood that the Pharos beacon on Sotha, a piece of alien technology that could guide ships and send messages across the warp, was essential to holding his civilization together. As detailed in the novel The Unremembered Empire, the entire administrative business of his worlds passed through the Pharos, allowing him to process calls for help, reports of enemy attacks, and orders for planetary governors across distances that would otherwise be impossible to manage. At the military level, his power rested on a defense network that dwarfed most planetary systems. On Calth alone, the defense grid included 250,000 surface-based weapon stations and nearly 1,000 orbital platforms. When the Great Crusade Gathering took place there, the Lord of the 13th brought 20 of his 25 chapters, roughly 200,000 warriors, for a single deployment. His ability to handle multiple tasks at the same time was described as almost frightening, sorting through 1,500 data reports while writing personal notes on battle planning by hand. Because of his record, the selection of War Master had been a choice between two Primarchs. Horus Lupercal had passion and charm, while the 13th son was more careful and measured. The Emperor chose Horus, and what the newly crowned Commander-in-Chief truly savored about the appointment was being chosen over the Lion and Guilliman specifically. The Lord of the 13th was always one of the sons the Master of Mankind could most depend on. These were the ones he called the Dauntless Few: himself, Rogal Dorn, and Sanguinius, Leman Russ. Together, the Emperor believed they could win any war the Imperium faced. As described in the book Know No Fear, the Lord of the 13th had built records of every theory of war and peace, intending to finish a master document once the crusade was complete. His plan was to turn the Ultramarines from warriors into leaders, statesmen, and rulers the moment the last enemy was defeated. He feared that some of his brother's legions, like the Space Wolves, might be too wild and too dangerous for a civilized society to accept once there were no more worlds to conquer. His own legion, he believed, would move smoothly into peace because they had been trained for it from the start. But being the most prepared son of the Emperor came with its own danger. His entire identity was built on being the perfect planner, and any failure in his designs hit him as a personal failing. His officers worried that by trying to be the Imperium's architect, general, and governor all at once, the Master of the 500 Worlds was betting humanity's survival on a single person. If the architect fell, the system fell with him, and the brother whose city he helped burn to the ground was about to prove them right. Chapter 3: The Shattered Dream. The Lord of Ultramar gathered 200,000 warriors at Calth for a joint campaign with the Wordbearers against an Orc threat, hoping the mission would mend the damaged relationship between the two legions. The wound had been opened since the destruction of Monarchia decades earlier, and he saw this as a chance to finally close it. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. As told in the book Know No Fear, the Sons of Lorgar had not come to fight alongside the Ultramarines. They had come to destroy them. The attack began quietly. Scrap code infected the planet's defense networks. Small, seemingly accidental failures broke down the Legion's ability to respond. So when the Sons of Lorgar finally opened fire, his first reaction was not rage, but disbelief. Enemy ships began firing on his own vessels. A massive transport was deliberately crashed into the surface of the Master World. And still, the Lord of the 500 Worlds refused to believe it was on purpose. He ordered his fleet not to return fire, viewing what was happening as a mistake that should not be made worse by adding his own violence to it. It took the Lord of the 17th himself speaking directly over the Vox to convince him that the attack was real. The humiliated brother was bragging proudly, mocking him for finally losing his famous calm, delighted to hear him speak with actual passion for the first time. The turning point came through data. Officers traced back old records and discovered that the Wordbearers had captured the fleet tender Campanile 136 hours before the assault began. Proof of a planned attack set up well in advance. Once the facts were laid out in terms his logical mind could not deny, his response was total. He cancelled his order to hold fire, declared Lorgar no longer any brother of his, swore to find him and kill him, and ordered what the Ultramarines called a system kill, a commitment to the destruction of the enemy's forces and every asset supporting them. The damage was already staggering. Nearly half the Legion had been destroyed or badly hurt in the opening hours. The Lord of the 13th was blown out into the vacuum of space without a helmet when the bridge of his flagship, the Macragge's Honor, was destroyed. For most beings, exposure to the void would mean instant death. He started killing word-bearers with his hands. He never stopped screaming, though no one could hear him in the silence of space. One enemy died with his head forced down into his chest. Another lost his spine through his breastplate. A third lost his head to a punch that treated power armor the way a hammer treats glass. The worst wound of the battle was not one he could punch his way out of, and it would follow him for 10,000 years. During the ground fighting, Corferon, the first captain of the 17th Legion, stabbed him with a chaos-cursed blade called an athame, the same kind of weapon that had been used to wound and turn the War Master. The blade was meant to corrupt the Lord of the 13 and drag him to the traitor side, just as Horus had been dragged. His response was to punch a hole through the captain's chest, briefly stopping one of his hearts, and walk away from the injury. The athame left a scar on his neck, not just a physical scar, a mark in the warp that would never fully heal. That scar would come back to destroy him years later. As the battle raged, he also realized the true cost of the Edict of Nicaea, the ruling that had banned the use of psychers across all the legions. It had been a trap that disarmed them of their only weapon against the demonic forces that Lorgar had unleashed on the battlefield. Facing literal demons on the bridge of his flagship, the 13th son was forced to accept that the old non-religious philosophy of the imperial truth could not explain what was happening. His brothers had made pacts with powers from the Imperium that no amount of logic could account for. He formally broke the edict and authorized his librarians to use their psychic powers in the name of survival. His forces drove the word-bearers from the Master World, but the purpose of the attack had never been to destroy the 13th Legion outright. It was to fuel a massive dark ritual. The sorcery carried out during the battle tore open a warp storm called the Ruin Storm, large enough to split the galaxy in two, and cut off all communication between his domain and the rest of the Imperium. The sun above the battlefield began to go nova from the bombardment. The survivors retreated into the underground cities beneath the planet's surface, beginning a war in the dark that would last for years. The light of the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon that guided all interstellar travel, went dark. Terra was cut off. He was alone. The news that followed only made it worse. As described in the novel The Unremembered Empire, the Preacher of the 17th revealed that Ferrus Manus, Corax, and Vulcan had been slaughtered at Isfahan V. This devastated the Lord of the 13, who believed he could win any war as long as he had at least one of those dauntless brothers by his side. With the galaxy divided and no word from Terra, he was forced to face the real possibility that the Emperor was dead and the Imperium had fallen. He admitted to Sergeant Teal that he had lost too much and was not showing the best of himself, but he was still the man Konor had raised, and his father had taught him that every plan needs a backup. If Terra had truly fallen, the Imperium had to begin again somewhere. So he chose Macragge and declared the founding of Imperium Secundus, a second Imperium built on the foundation of the 500 worlds, a safe harbor for any forces still loyal to the Emperor's dream. The declaration did not come easily. He feared it looked like pride and ambition, that it would make him look no different than Horus himself. Sitting on a throne was not in his nature. The brother who had betrayed him was still out there, and the Lord of the 13 was not done with him. After the battle, the Lord of Ultramar did not simply sit on his capital world and wait. He put together a makeshift fleet of barely functional ships and chased the Lord of the 17th, burning for revenge. He caught up to Lorgar and Angren at the World Eater's home planet, where the Lord of the 12th was taking too long settling personal business. Despite having a rough force against two full Legion fleets, he won the space battle, destroying the 17th Legion's capital ship and nearly taking the 12th via boarding. On the ground, he charged directly at the Preacher of the 17th. The Ultramarine Lord's uppercut shattered the Preacher's chest and crushed his ribs. The Word-Bearer's mace tore off half of his face. The 13th son absorbed the hit and kept fighting, even holding off the Lord of the Word Eaters for a time despite being exhausted and barely wounded. He only fell back when the 12th began transforming into a demon. That was not bravery anymore, that was stupidity. The arrival of his brothers at Macragge only made things more complicated. Sanguinius arrived along with Lionel Johnson, but instead of bringing unity, the Lord of the First came armed and suspicious. As detailed in the book Angels of Caliban, the Knight of Caliban arrived with thousands of warriors and drop pods orbiting the capital world, ready to destroy the Ultramarines if he decided the Lord of the 13 was using the heresy as an excuse to make Ultramar his own personal kingdom. He openly accused his brother of a betrayal as great as the War Masters, claiming he was building a new empire on the corpse of the first. At the same time, he privately admitted that only the 13th son possessed the vision, attention to detail, and relentless energy to actually pull off a functioning Second Imperium in such a short time. When the Lion pushed for the complete burning of Illyrium from orbit to deal with rebel groups, he refused to support the killing of 4 million citizens. He called it madness. The Knight of Caliban called his brother an ignorant stable boy and accused him of being too eager to talk and lacking the hardness needed to control the empire he had built. Their arguments boiled over into physical violence more than once. When he discovered that the Lion had secretly brought the captive Konrad Kurz, the insane lord of the Night Lords, to the capital world without telling anyone, he attacked the Knight of Caliban and pinned him to a wall by the throat. Tarasha Euten proved her worth during this period as well. The Night Haunter escaped captivity and terrorized the citizens of the capital for months, even reaching her directly, but the woman who raised a son of the Emperor did not flinch. When he asked her advice on how to manage the Lion, she gave him her usual practical answer. Let the Angel of Baal rule, let the Lion be the warlord, and devote yourself to being the statesman. If the Knight of Caliban matched him in intelligence, he could not stop him with force. Only with patience and careful planning, or as she put it was time to start measuring bricks. Because neither the Lord of the First nor the 13th son could accept the other one leading, they crowned the Angel of Baal as regent of the Second Imperium, with the Lion as Lord Protector and the Lord of the 13 as Lord Warden, running the new empire day to day. The breaking point came during the trial of the Night Haunter. The prisoner revealed that the Lion had secretly gone around Sanguinius' ban on orbital strikes by using drop pods and assault rams as piloted bombs to destroy a mountain fortress called the Gate Peak. Furious at the dishonesty, he took the Lion's sword and broke it over his knee, telling the Knight of Caliban that his sword was worth exactly as much as his honor. Then came the moment that changed the course of the war. The Lion argued that the captive's own visions of the future, which showed him eventually being killed by an Imperial assassin, proved that the Emperor was still alive. Because if the Master of Mankind were truly dead, no assassin would ever be sent. The logic was impossible to argue against. The realization that the original Imperium might still stand, that his father might still be alive and fighting on Terra, left the Lord of the 13 pale and shaken, his voice a haunted whisper. He had founded a rival empire while his father still lived. As described in the novel Ruinstorm, the Lord of Ultramar looked back on the Second Imperium with horror, seeing it as an act of pride born from the lie of the Ruinstorm. He admitted that he had knowingly ignored the lessons of human history. He feared that the shadow of the Athame blade that had cut his throat at Calth had infected his mind, driving him to smash the remaining cursed blades into dust, trying to take back a destiny he feared was no longer his to control. The three brothers took separate paths towards Terra, with the Lord of the 13 accepting that he and the Lion would not reach their father's side in time, and viewing their role as a force to break through the traitor blockade so Sanguinius could reach the Empire. He forbade the use of any historians or record keepers for the entire effort. If Terra survived, the Second Imperium would become an unremembered empire, an act undone and forgotten. But the man who had built one empire out of fear and torn it down out of shame was about to reshape the entire Imperium's military forever, and the cost of that choice would echo for 10,000 years. Chapter 4: The Codex Choice. Sanguinius was dead by the time the Ultramarines reached Terra. The Angel of Baal had broken through the traitor blockade exactly as planned, reached the Emperor's side aboard the War Master's flagship, and died fighting Horus in the final hours of the siege. the master of mankind, had been brutally wounded and placed upon the Golden Throne. The Imperial Palace was in ruins. The dream he had spent his entire life working toward lay shattered across the surface of humanity's birth world. The failure to arrive in time tortured the 13th Son for decades. He had commanded the most powerful legion in the galaxy and built the most advanced network of supply and communication any son of the Emperor had ever created. None of it had been enough. The approach of his fleet had forced Horus to lower his void shields and invite the Emperor aboard for the final fight. But that was cold comfort. The Lord of the 13 had not been there, and the brother he loved most had died in his place. In the aftermath, with many of his dauntless brothers dead or missing, the 13th Son took up the position of Lord Commander of the Imperium, picked up the Emperor's burning blade, and led the Scouring, the campaign to drive all remaining traitor forces towards the Eye of Terror. Even as he fought to hold the Imperium together, his mind was already working on a problem that went far beyond any single war. The Horus Heresy had proven that a single Primarch commanding a full legion could bring the entire Imperium to the edge of destruction. So the Lord of the 13 concluded that betrayal was a permanent part of human nature, and the only reasonable answer was to limit the power held by any single person. His solution was the Codex Astartes. As detailed in the book Dark Imperium, he decided that no one should ever hold the power of a legion again. His new laws were not just a book of battle methods, but a reshaping of the Imperium's entire military structure, designed to break the original legions into smaller units called chapters, each limited to roughly 1,000 battle brothers. The Emperor's vision, he believed, was for mortal men to govern humanity, not the superhuman warriors who had nearly ended it. Smaller chapters would make sure no single commander could ever threaten the Imperium the way Horus had. He called the breaking apart of his own 13th Legion the price of faithfulness. And while he recognized that smaller formations had clear weaknesses compared to the old legends, he believed the force of reason demanded it. He also extended the reforms into his own domain, granting many of his worlds their own self-rule to make sure his personal power could not be seized by a future traitor. Before the new laws could reshape the Imperium, he had one more brother to deal with, and this fight would prove that even the man who wrote the rules knew when to break them. During this same period, the architect of the new laws also fought and killed the Lord of the Alpha region on the planet Escrador. The Lord of the 20th had assumed that the creator of the Codex would follow his own rules. He was wrong. The Lord of the 13th broke his own methods, separating from the main force with a small group of warriors and struck directly at the Alpha Legion's headquarters. The two brothers clashed in combat, and Alpharius fell. The battle did not end there. The Headless Hydra struck back with such crushing force that it nearly wiped out the forces involved. After a week of heavy fighting and heavy losses, the 13th Legion had to pull off the planet entirely. The Alpha Legion, without their commander, won the battle, leaving open the lasting question of whether the man who died was truly the Lord of the 20th at all. As described in Gathering Storm: Rise of the Primarch, the new laws were meant to define the role of the Space Marines for ages to come. Not all of his brothers agreed, with Leman Russ and the Space Wolves opposing the reforms from the start. The most serious resistance came from Rogal Dorn, the very man who had held the walls of the Imperial Palace during the siege. As described in the novel Shadow of Ulanor, the wall builder of Terra fought against the breaking of his mighty legion with everything he had, and the grief of that decision wounded him at his core. The clash between the two sons of the Emperor brought the Imperium to the edge of a second civil war. Yet the Lord of the 13th still held a deep respect for the defender of the palace. He personally ordered a massive statue of Dorn to be placed at the east end of the Great Chamber, declaring that because the Lord of the Seventh had watched over the palace during humanity's darkest hour, he should watch over the council forever. The breaking point came at the Iron Cage, where the wall builder led his legion into a brutal siege against the Iron Warriors to burn off the grief of the heresy, a slaughter that left the Imperial fists shattered. The novel The Last Son of Dorn names this as a defining wound for the 7th Legion, with warriors like Auriax Dentalion, the eventual founder of the Fifth Exemplar, standing at the wall builder's side during the near destruction of their legion. The aftermath provided the final proof. The era of the legions was over. The second founding ceremonies that followed saw every original legion broken into pieces. The Imperial Fists were divided into 7 main successor chapters: the Excoriators, Crimson Fists, Black Templars, Soul Drinkers, Executioners, Iron Knights, and Fist Exemplar. The traditional prize of the Dorn's Blade, also known as the Sword of Sebastus, went to the lord who best honored Dorn's legacy in the Feast of Blades. His sons were split into groups like the Aurora Marines and the Doom Eagles. This split also led to a divide in beliefs. The Black Templars adopted their own version of the Imperial Faith, a religious path that some feared mirrored the very word-bearers who had started the heresy. Across the Imperium, what had once been formations of hundreds of thousands were reduced to orders of 1,000, and it was the Lord of the 13 who had ended the age of the legions. By M32, over 1,000 years later, the new laws had become so entrenched that even High Lords and Inquisitors could not get around them. One Inquisitor directly warned that you cannot find ways around the Codex Astartes. The High Lords reacted with horror at the sight of even a single order operating at full strength, viewing it as a clear violation of the reforms. Malcador the Sigillite had been responsible for setting up much of the government the Imperium now used, but it was the Lord of the 13 who would help make sure it could actually function. The fact that the Imperium was still running at all after 10,000 years, even barely, spoke to the quality of what he had built. The long-term cost was severe. The breaking of the legions meant that Space Marines became a slowly dying resource, with some predicting they would become a thing of myth within a few more centuries. By M32, when a massive orc invasion called the Beast threatened Terra itself, the Imperial Fists were forced to commit their entire force at one stroke for the first time since the siege, leaving the palace walls bare because they no longer had the mass strength of a legion to draw from. Thousands of years later, the Lord of the 13 admitted he had been mistaken. He confessed that he should never have given his worlds their freedom, and that he had been too focused on breaking the legions while forgetting about the self-interest of lesser men. He also planned to rewrite his work, giving the new version the name Codex Imperialis, which promised to cover the good governance that the Imperium badly needed. The architect of the new laws had saved humanity from another war master, but the price of that safety was an Imperium that grew weaker with every passing century, and the man who wrote those laws was about to be removed from the galaxy entirely, frozen in time by a brother's poison blade while the empire he built slowly rotted without him. Chapter 5. The Fall at Thessala. Over the green gas giant of Thessala, the Lord of Ultramar made the worst decision of his life. His fleet had cornered 3 groups of the Emperor's children, a legion that had once been led by the perfectionist Fulgrim, but had since given themselves to the chaos god Slanesh. The Phoenician himself had risen into a form no longer recognizable as human. As described in the book Dark Imperium, his fleet was caught from the sides by the enemy. Despite suspecting a trap, he chose revenge over reason. The lessons Konor and Tarasha had spent their lives teaching him were falling on a hardened heart. Years of war, the loss of his brothers, and the failure to reach Terra in time had slowly warped his drive to save the Imperium into a need for a real blow against the enemy, not a strategic victory, a personal one. He could clearly remember each and every time he had given into his anger, and he knew this moment would be added to that list. So, against the advice of his captains, he ordered a teleport assault directly onto the Phoenicians' flagship, the Pride of the Emperor, planning to hold the demon Primarch personally while his fleet destroyed the ship around them. Like Horus before the final battle, the fallen brother had lowered his shields to lure his angry kin aboard, and the Lord of the 13 walked right into it. The journey through the Pride of the Emperor was itself a form of punishment. The ship that had once been a showcase of human art and culture had been twisted into a gallery of obscenity and blasphemy. Walking through its ruined hallways, he could not push away the memories of Fulgrim welcoming him warmly into beautiful halls filled with cheering warriors. When he finally reached the great performance hall where the creature waited, the brother he had known was gone. As the same source describes, the Phoenician's legs had been replaced by a long, snake-like tail. His body stretched to hold 4 arms, and crimson horns crowned his head. A savage god, a creature of Slaanesh in full, the demon mocked him immediately, calling him a little emperor playing in the sand, making tiny empires that were nothing in the face of the warp's power. Then the serpent admitted what no one expected. While he had always found the 13th son dull, he acknowledged that he was the best of them all. What followed was the most one-sided fight of the Lord of the 13's entire life, and it would end with a wound that could never heal. The fight began, and within seconds, he knew he was beaten. The serpent was faster, stronger, and blessed by a god of excess whose gifts made every movement impossibly precise. 4 swords against a single blade. The demon used his greater size and multiple limbs to overwhelm the 13th son, wrapping him in his tail, tearing his helmet free, and exposing his throat. What happened next was tied directly to Calth. The creature could see the scar left on his brother's neck by Corpheron's Athame blade, a wound in the warp that can never truly heal. As described in the novel, this mark was visible not just physically, but in the Imperium itself, a permanent weak point in his superhuman body. A blade he never saw delivered a cut across his throat, and blood sprayed from the ruined wound. Burning poison crawled into the opening where his blood flooded out. His body went numb. His heart began to struggle towards a final beat that would not come. Even on the edge of death, he cried out to the Emperor, asking who would now lead humanity. Captain Andros and Second Captain Enetil organize a frantic emergency teleport to pull their dying lord out, throwing themselves at the Serpent God to buy time. Most of those who charge were killed instantly. Andros lost his head to sonic weaponry during the rescue. By the time the Lord of Ultramar was pulled from the Pride of the Emperor, he was as good as dead. The 13th son did not die, not fully. He was returned to Macragge and placed within the Temple of Correction, a chamber so vast that a warlord titan could walk through it without touching the walls. As told in Gathering Storm, Rise of the Primarch, he was seated upon a throne of marble, gold, and fine metal, appearing as though resting with his eyes closed. Across his knees lay the Emperor's grand blade, and above him, massive machines fed energy through thick cables to maintain the rippling stasis field that held him frozen in time. A delicate line of glinting, jewel-like blood remained frozen at his throat, the last evidence of the Phoenician's killing stroke. Even his battle armor remained scarred by the duel. For 10,000 years, the 13th son sat in that shrine as the Temple of Correction became the sacred heart of the Ultramarines chapter. Countless warriors knelt there over centuries. Burning holy smoke filled the air constantly, and speakers built to look like winged babies broadcast war songs and prayers throughout the chamber. Travelers from across the galaxy came to see the body of the avenging son, and some claimed that his wound was slowly healing, though such a thing was impossible within a stasis field. When he eventually woke up, he found 26 different versions of the Battle of Thessala in his own library. None of them were fully accurate. During those 10,000 years, the Imperium transformed into a civilization he would not recognize. The non-religious philosophy he had believed in was buried under layers of religious rules. The Ecclesiarchy, a massive church dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as a god, became one of the most powerful organizations in the Imperium, while the government swelled into a bloated, wasteful mess that consumed resources instead of managing them. Many of his former worlds declared themselves independent, and some fell so far that ordinary people were reduced back to poverty and slavery. His empire itself was not spared. Tyranids invaded and nearly destroyed the capital world. Orcs attacked, Tau forces pushed into the region, and Necrons awakened beneath the surface of others, all while he sat frozen and unable to act. The Empire had not just lost its architect, it had forgotten why he built it in the first place. And for 10,000 years, the only proof that such a man had ever existed sat frozen on a marble throne, waiting for someone desperate enough to wake him. Chapter 6: The Unwanted Return. 10,000 years after the Phoenician's blade put him into stasis, Roboute Guilliman opened his eyes to a galaxy that had become everything he had spent his first life trying to prevent. As told in the book Gathering Storm, Rise of the Primarch, the Archmagos Belisarius Cawl had been given a secret task by the Lord of Ultramar thousands of years ago. find a way to bring him back if he ever fell. The Master Tech Priest had spent 10,000 years working on the problem, developing the Armor of Fate, a suit of power armor capable of healing even his mortal wounds. But technology alone was not enough. Ibrahim, the emissary of the Eldari god of the dead in need, declared that for him to truly live, he must first die. As Black Legion forces stormed the Temple of Correction on Macragge, the Elven priestess cut the stasis fuel cables, while Calth's mechanical healing shell closed around the frozen body. The tech priest healed his flesh, the power of Enid restored his soul. Then, the Lord of the 13 woke up, and the first thing he did was start killing. He was wearing the magnificent new armor and held the Emperor's burning blade, now lit from hilt to tip with leaping flames. The look in his eyes was one of such killing intensity that even the loyalist in the room stepped back. His mind processed the situation in the rigid system he had used his entire life. First theoretical, he was alive. Second theoretical, he recognized nothing around him. Third theoretical, he was surrounded by forces tainted by chaos. Practical, he would kill them all. A Khorne berserker broke the silence by charging at the newly risen lord. He moved with speed that even the Eldari would have struggled to match, cutting the berserker in half at the waist with a single sweep of his burning blade. Then the rest of the Chaos forces rushed forward. The slaughter began. Sorcerers, berserkers, terminators, and line infantry fell in rapid order as he stormed forward. Bolts and shells bounced off his new armor, and his power fist crushed warriors through marble columns. Chief Librarian Sigurius released a massive wave of psychic energy that hurled traitor marines from their feet. The Risen Lord's gaze fell upon the librarian for just a heartbeat, a single look that seemed to strip the man down to his soul, before he stormed on through the enemy ranks and cleared the shrine of every Chaos warrior inside. After the Black Legion was driven from Macragge, the Returned Lord withdrew into himself. He rarely left his quarters. He allowed only officers with essential information to see him, burying himself in reports and data, gathering knowledge of a galaxy that had shifted beyond recognition. The people he loved were long dead, including Marius Gage, the first chapter master after the heresy, who had been to him what Malcador had been to the Emperor. Without that anchor in his life, the 13th son walked on the edge of a knife. The civilization he had built on reason had become what he would later describe as a bloated, rotting corpse, driven not by hope, but by fear, hate, and ignorance. He found the art of the new era disgusting, and hated the flying servitor babies that served as speakers and messengers. Every symbol of devotion was a reminder that his work had been undone from the inside. His own body had changed as well. His noble face was now covered with dozens of wrinkles. His golden hair had thinned. Gray appeared on his temples, and dark circles sat under his eyes. He was still a creation of the Emperor, magnificent even in decline, but his appearance was fading under the weight of his burdens. Since the resurrection, he had been haunted by constant pain that he held back by clenching his jaw. The serpent's wound had not fully gone away, and physical pain was sometimes joined by what he called emotional pain, though he refused to accept that the traitor's sword had wounded his soul as well as his body. Worst of all, the death that had consumed him for 10,000 years had left another mark. He could no longer sleep. The medical officers could not explain it, and the Returned Lord believed the long years in stasis had given him enough rest. Despite the humor he still carried, shown in moments like struggling to pick up a plastic document because the Armor of Fate was too bulky, and joking to Captain Sicarius that he had the manual skill of a battle robot. The Returned Lord was a changed man. The fact that even his own warriors were surprised by moments of humor showed how far the myth had drifted from the reality. Getting back to Terra would nearly kill him all over again, and what waited for him in the Emperor's throne room would break something inside him that no armor could protect. The road to Terra was not straightforward. During the Terran Crusade, the great demon Kairos Fate Weaver captured the Returned Lord, binding him with chains forged from his own buried emotions. The Blood God's greatest demon, Skarbrand, tried to break him free just to kill him personally. The Harlequins led the mysterious cipher to rescue him, and together they escaped, with the 13th son cutting off Skarbrand's head in the process. He reached Terra via the webway with the alien allies' help, only for Magnus and the Thousand Sons to follow them, leading to a battle on the surface of Luna. The Red Giant threw a building at the Returned Lord, set him on fire, and tried to break him outright. He managed to break Magnus's jaw in return, and with the help of the Eldari and the Sisters of Silence, the Crimson King was driven back into the warp. Upon reaching Terra, the Returned Lord traveled to the Emperor's throne room alone and remained inside for many hours. As described in the novel Dark Imperium, his expression when he came out was blank, and he stated only that he had received all the understanding he needed. What the source reveals about that meeting was devastating. Speaking with the Emperor was like talking to a star, a force so vast and alien that it lacked the gentleness and warmth the master of mankind had once possessed when he walked among men. The being on the golden throne acted like a prisoner locked in an iron cage who has passed a file to cut his way free. Guilliman was that file. The Lord of Ultramar realized that the Emperor had never loved his sons. They were instruments, tools designed for a specific purpose, and nothing more. And the returned son felt the weight of that truth settle into his bones. Immediately after, the Returned Lord moved to seize control. He demanded an assembly of the High Lords of Terra and declared that he was resuming his ancient seat as Lord Commander, claiming the Emperor's personal approval. He forcibly removed 5 of the High 12 and replaced hundreds of lesser lords with his own chosen people. When the surviving High Lords tried to stage an overthrow, he outplanned every one of their efforts, crushed the attempt, and executed the traitors. Then came the Second Battle of Terra, also known as the Battle of Lionsgate, when 88 demonic waves of the Blood God attacked the Imperial Palace itself. The Returned Lord led the defense alongside the Sisters of Silence and the Custodians, drove back the demonic army, and proved to the High Lords that in this new era, no world was safe from the powers of chaos. He then did what the Imperium had not seen in 10,000 years. He put the entire civilization on war footing. As detailed in the novel Avenging Sun, he created the Officio Logisticarum, a new organization staffed with men of unusual drive and energy who often clash with the wasteful existing government offices. He declared all past treaties of self-rule for the 500 worlds cancelled, bringing his home realm back under direct military control and restoring the ancient Tetrarchy Council. He turned the Imperium over to a state of total war, beginning the gathering of forces on a scale not seen since the Great Crusade. Perhaps the most bitter deal the 13th Son ever made was with the Ecclesiarchy. Despite his personal hatred of religion, expressed in his famous words, "Emperor, save me from faith," he accepted the Church's support because it was simply too powerful to oppose. He cannot tear out the faith without tearing out the Imperium's will to fight. And so, the Imperium's greatest non-believer was forced to lead a religious empire. He appointed the humble Frater Matthew as his militant apostolic, choosing a low-ranking priest he thought he could control as a voice to calm the fears of the faithful. He also created the Logos Historica Verita, a secret research organization, because the Inquisition had been altering and deleting events from the records for thousands of years, leaving only what served their own views. Most of the researchers he recruited were people he had personally saved from the Inquisition's punishment. Even determining the exact year of his awakening proved difficult because the calendar itself had been changed. As revealed in the novel Godblight, the Returned Lord later discovered that he secretly held an 8,000-year-old copy of the Lectitio Divinitatis, the original holy text of the imperial cult, written by none other than his traitor brother Lorgar. The man who had destroyed the Preacher's holy city was now ruling an empire built on that same brother's holy book. The weight of that truth settled over him like a chain he could never remove. But the architect of the Imperium had no time to sit with his grief. The largest military gathering in 10,000 years was now waiting for him, and the galaxy was running out of time. Chapter 7: Rise or Prolonged Fall. Every solution the Returned Lord reached for required him to break a rule he himself had made. He had written the Codex Astartes to prevent anyone from holding Legion-level power. Yet the Indomitus Crusade and the Unnumbered Sons gave him exactly that. He had given the 500 worlds their self-rule to prevent one-man rule, and now he had taken that freedom back to prevent collapse. The man who had spent his first life building systems to outlast him was now the only thing holding those systems together. Fleet Primus alone held nearly 200 warships and thousands of transport vessels forming up in the Sol system. Across the galaxy, similar fleets were being put together and sent out to take back worlds lost to chaos, alien invasion, and simple neglect. The Crusade reached as far as Baal, the home world of the Blood Angels, which had been under siege by Tyranids. On every world the Return Lord freed, he ordered food, water, medical supplies, and defense forces sent to help the people recover. But these rational and caring actions, the same approach he had practiced during the Great Crusade, were seen by the people of the 42nd Millennium as acts of divine kindness, further building his image as a sacred figure sent by the Emperor. One Space Marine in his presence was so overwhelmed that he could not speak, went to a workshop, and cut out his own tongue. The fact that this kind of reaction only annoyed the 13th son made no difference to anyone but him. Behind the scale of the operation lay a truth he cannot escape. The Despoiler's 13th Black Crusades over the past 10,000 years had not been random attacks. As described in the Book Avenging Sun, Abaddon had been dismantling the ancient pylon worlds one by one. These Noctilith structures held a barrier between the warp and real space in place, and with enough of them destroyed, the Great Rift splitting the galaxy in two was the result. The Imperium had been boxed into the Sol system before the Crusade broke the ring, and the Lord of the 13 established readout worlds like Ganymede and Bastion worlds like Hydrafor to create firm supply chains and rebuild the communication network across a galaxy cut in half. Primaris Space Marines became the main tool of his effort to rebuild warriors created by Belisarius Cawl over 10,000 years of secret work. According to the Master Tech Priest, these new warriors were stronger, tougher, smarter, and perfected versions of the Emperor's original design. Rather than unleash them all at once, the Return Lord organized the first waves of Primaris into the Unnumbered Sons, formations made up of warriors from mixed gene lines who fought together to build brotherhood before being sent out into separate chapters through torchbearer fleets. Every part of this approach was carefully designed to avoid the political crisis of bringing back the old legions, which his own laws had forbidden and which his rivals on Terra feared above almost anything else. He declared that the time for merely holding on was over, that the Imperium must move forward or die, and that he intended to restore humanity to the standards of his greatest age rather than continuing to live like frightened animals in a crumbling museum. Privately, he knew the real picture. As described in the novel Godblight, he admitted that the Imperium had wandered far from the path of understanding and lost what made humanity human. He was often merely slowing the bleeding rather than winning any ground. Then, a brother he thought he had left behind in the dust of the heresy came back to prove that the wars of the past were far from over. When the Plague Wars erupted in Ultramar, the Lord of the 500 Worlds was forced to leave the broader Crusade and return to defend his own realm. Mortarion, his traitor brother and demon Primarch of the Death Guard, had launched a three-sided invasion from the Scourge Stars. The Pale King used warp engines to spread undead hordes and psychic plagues across the region. 3 worlds in the north fell to chaos outright, and disease bombing destroyed planet after planet as the Death Guard advanced. Seeds of rot were sent to the chosen planets first, causing sickness that killed millions within days. From the bodies of the fallen, demons appeared, and among the survivors, cults of decay sprang up, calling ever more powerful servants of Nurgle. The Return Lord's response showed both his strength and his growing desperation. He appointed new Tetrarchs, including Primaris Captain Decimus Felix and First Captain Severus Agamen, and gave them the task of expanding the borders of his empire to once again cover its ancient reach. He fought the Death Lord directly, battling him in personal combat across multiple engagements, while ordering that wounded soldiers be taken to healing worlds where doctors fought for every life, turning to mercy killing only as a last resort. In his homeland, they said that in such detail, the difference between the Emperor and the father of the Ultramarines was most clearly visible. The high point came when the Pale King, powered up by Nurgle, used a specially made poison to kill the Lord of the 13 outright. The toxin ate through his body, and the fumes killed everything nearby, Space Marines and demons alike. Even the Death Lord had to create a psychic dome around himself to survive the spreading death. Watching his brother die, Mortarion tried to convince him to give in and join the service of Nurgle. The 13th son refused. He prayed to the Emperor for help, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Master of Mankind responded. The burned remains of the fallen Primarch rose into the air. His body and armor were restored, and a being of impossible power with glowing eyes spoke through his voice. The Pale King, stunned, thought he saw the Emperor standing before him, but the being refused to accept that name. It was Roboute Guilliman, the Avenging Son, saved by the power of the golden presence on the throne. The defeated Death Lord pulled back into a warp portal, and the planet was cleared of demonic forces. The Returned Lord came back to himself kneeling in a circle of earth that had been heated to glass by the temperatures his body had produced. He remembered all of it, but he refused to think too carefully about the nature of the force that had entered his soul. As recounted in the same novel, the Returned Lord later carefully suggested that the Emperor might be waking up, showing his power more and more through the tarot, living saints, and now the direct saving of a Primarch. He spoke with a mechanical copy of Calth's mind about the possibility of bringing the Master of Mankind back to life. The artificial mind gave him a clear warning: do not try. The being on the throne was no longer who he was when he entered the throne room. His return would lead to a hell paved with good intentions, because gods, no matter what they call themselves, are a corruption of existence. After many hours of arguing with himself, the Lord of the 13 came to a conclusion. The truth did not matter. His purpose was protecting people. And just as his father had once lied about the true nature of the warp to protect humanity, the Returned Son now continued that lie, speaking from public platforms about the Emperor's love for his worshippers. The enemies standing in his way were no longer just the forces of chaos. The Imperium itself was fighting him at every turn. His reforms were met with active resistance from every direction. Stubborn Imperial commanders used incomplete records to argue over loyalty oaths. The Inquisition blocked his search for knowledge. His priest Matthew openly ignored his orders, preaching his godhood and organizing a movement called the Crusade of the Witnesses. On one occasion, the priest convinced Sisters of Battle to free a mysterious child prisoner believed to be a carrier of the Emperor's power. The rescue attempt led to the deaths of guards, Sisters of Silence, and even Primaris Space Marines. When he confronted Matthew afterward, his anger was an explosion so violent that the ground itself shook, revealing a side of the 13th son that his reputation for calm had never hinted at. Internal enemies also struck at the Crusade itself. The destruction of the battleship, Embrace of Fire, in Fleet Quintus, proved that people within the government would rather see the Imperium fail than see Guilliman succeed. Reports from the Eastern Tetra reveal that local systems had been drained by centuries of corruption, stolen funds, and falsified tax records, forcing the Returned Lord to use military intervention just to restore basic rule. As described in the book Avenging Son, the Returned Lord admitted that in his first life he had been narrow in his thinking and had not understood that the wars of the spirit were as important as the wars of the body. The custodian Maldevar Colquhoun observed that while the Lord of Ultramar brought hope, he was a drawn blade created as a weapon of a past age, now ruling a society built on worship and decay, because the tools the Returned Lord used to save the Imperium, faith, public messages of devotion, and total one-man rule, were the same tools his enemies had always used. Every solution he reached for required him to become more like the thing he was trying to destroy. Even after the triumph at Rakos, the 13th son admitted that the Imperium still sat on the edge of ruin, and he moved to the next war with a soul weighed down by sorrow. He wondered whether it would have been better for them all to have burned in the fires of the War Master's ambition than to live and see what the Imperium had become. But there was one small light in the darkness. When Lionel Johnson, the Lord of the Fist, woke in the current era and learned from Commander Dante of the Blood Angels that the 13th son was alive and had launched the Indomitus Crusade, the first thought rising above all others in the Lion's mind was simple: Rob, I am not alone. Even the most suspicious of his brothers found comfort in knowing that the Lord of Ultramar was still fighting. Whether this was truly a second rise, or simply a longer fall, the galaxy had not yet decided. And somewhere across the stars, leading an Imperium he barely recognized, the last son of Konor Guilliman was still building. But one of his sons paid a price that nearly broke the chapter itself. Watch the entire story of Captain Titus to see what happens when the Imperium turns on its own heroes.